People who work in human resources, what is the weirdest thing you have ever seen? Story 1. The maintenance guy had been living above the ceiling of the building. He had built a small hidden living space with electricity, a mini fridge, and everything. Story 2. I used to work in HR at a large corporation. There was a big HR back office team handling a lot of processing and data entry, including employees' bank information for their salaries. One day, 2 employees with the same name started on the same day, and a massive disaster unfolded. First, the banking information was entered incorrectly, with one employee's salary going to the wrong person. One of them noticed and had it corrected, but the other didn't, so both salaries ended up being deposited into one account. The unpaid employee refused to come to work, but payroll insisted that the payment had cleared and that the account was in his name. As a result, he was terminated for job abandonment. He kept calling HR, but the support team kept confusing him with the other employee who was still working there. When they raised a ticket to update his banking information, they accidentally changed the details for the wrong person. Now, the guy who no longer worked for the company was getting paid, while the one who did wasn't. When this mess was finally resolved, the first guy was reinstated. However, on his first day back, security misidentified him and issued him the other employee's badge. As a result, he clocked in under the wrong name and, once again, wasn't getting paid because he never clocked in for himself. It took about 3 months to sort everything out. Moral of the story: use a damn email address to identify people. Story 3. Years ago, I worked in HR for a retail store. One of the managers would always clock out on time, but the store alarm wouldn't be set until 30 to 45 minutes later. Since we had ongoing issues with internal theft, we suspected he was stealing. Loss prevention approved the installation of security cameras across all stores, but we were instructed not to discuss it in order to catch any potential theft. Due to the way the ceiling was designed, the cameras weren't too obvious, but if you knew what to look for, they were noticeable. Turns out, the guy wasn't stealing. He was secretly meeting up with a 16-year-old coworker. He was 25 and expecting his first child with his wife. I didn't see the footage, but our regional loss prevention manager did, and had to turn it over to the police. The real kicker? The girl's father was a captain on that very police force. Story 4. We had a new hire. I first heard about him through the grapevine. He had been fired from his last job for masturbating in the break room. Somehow, he still got hired at our company. God knows why, because I never heard a single good thing about him from anyone. His job was to sweep the floors in our factory. It wasn't backbreaking work. Endless, sure, but manageable. He could take it slow, chat with other employees, and move around freely. We had retired and disabled workers doing the same job just fine. In his first 3 weeks, I received a flood of complaints and write-ups about him. So many that it was hard to keep track. Issues included extended break times, ignoring repeated requests to complete tasks, smoking on the job and not in designated areas, constantly being on his phone, making racist, sexist jokes, poor hygiene complaints, OSHA violations, not wearing PPE. As usual, I fast-tracked his termination and sent it to the head of HR. Weeks passed, and I started receiving complaints about him again. Confused, I went to HR to ask if they were just delayed reports, because in my mind, he had been fired weeks ago. Turns out, he never was. He was the nephew of the head of HR. Instead of firing him, she quietly transferred him to another department and took all complaints about him directly, except for one that slipped through to me. His new role? Security guard, but not the kind you see at music festivals. His job was to sit at a post, push a button to let people into the factory, and log their entry and exit times. He was assigned to train under the sweetest old lady. Everyone, including the CEO, called her Grandma because of how kind she was. One day, I ran into Grandma on her break. She looked upset. It wasn't her usual break time, so I asked her why she was in the break room alone so early. "It's the new hire, personal time," she said. I asked her what she meant. She looked disturbed, almost on the verge of tears. She told me she had filed several complaints. Hadn't I read them? I hadn't. None of them ever reached me. Then she explained, since his transfer, he had discovered a computer at his post used to log entries and exits. It wasn't connected to the internet, but that didn't stop him. On his second day, while Grandma went to the bathroom, he started masturbating, using porn he brought from home on a flash drive. She caught him, and he acted like it was no big deal. Over the following weeks, it escalated. He continued masturbating at work, even when Grandma walked in on him. When she confronted him, he told her, "I don't give a fuck if you watch, but if you don't want to see it, just leave." So she did. She made a schedule. Every 2 hours, she would leave for 15 minutes so he could do his business. I was furious. I went straight to the head of HR and told her that Grandma had hired a lawyer and was threatening to sue the company. It wasn't true, but I knew it was the only way to make something happen. The case was immediately transferred to the legal department, and he was fired that same morning. The head of HR still argued that we couldn't fire him without proof. The meeting ended with her storming out, saying, "Fine, do whatever you want." She quit a few months later. Story 5. An employee from a different country and culture never showered. He said that where he came from, people typically shower about once a month. His coworkers repeatedly complained about the smell, which was so bad it made people gag. Eventually, his supervisor sent him home and told him he couldn't come back until he showered. Since it was a unionized workplace, the employee filed a grievance with the union steward. They both came into my office, which had a camera, as it was where we handled major disciplinary meetings. The moment they walked in, I nearly gagged. The smell was overwhelming. I had 2 chairs in front of my desk and asked them to take a seat while I went to pull the employee's file. As I left, I pulled the door closed behind me. I went straight to my boss's office, explained the situation, and asked him to pull up the camera feed from my office. What we saw was hilarious. The union steward was holding his shirt over his nose, looking absolutely miserable, and telling the guy, "Goddamn, dude, you're killing me. You've got to take a shower." After letting them marinate in the stench for about 10 minutes, I went back in. The union steward immediately retracted the grievance and agreed to send the guy home. Story 6. HR pulled me in for a couple of weeks after an angry prostitute tried to drive through one of our gates looking for Anthony. She had met him on a dating site, and according to her, he owed her $350 and a car for her abortion. We didn't have an Anthony working there, but many of the details she gave the police in her statement made the company believe she wasn't completely delusional. HR picked me for the job because, before moving into management, I had worked in IT. For 2 days, I walked around to every PC in the building, updating proxy settings and telling my coworkers I had figured out how to make email faster. I felt like an idiot, but it worked. For the next 12 days, I monitored a squid proxy. I caught Anthony on day 1, but HR kept me at it. That's when I discovered that one of our employees had been using the company network to look up pictures of animal feces on plates. He claimed it was for a college art project, but the guy was over 60 and wasn't enrolled in any courses the company was paying for. The weirdest thing I found: a search for mixed breed terrier on Corel saucer. Yeah, that officially counts as the weirdest shit I've ever seen. I was an HR manager for a small company that shared an office with a mid-sized business. Their HR manager, let's call her Cheryl, really disliked us. Our company cultures clashed, but it had never been a huge issue, just some tension, until the day they decided to terminate one of the shared administrative staff members. I wasn't part of the decision, though I agreed with it. Technically, that admin was their employee. The next morning, Cheryl called me into her office to inform me of the termination. She made it very clear that I was not to email our employees about the change. As she put it, they'll find out when they get in and see she isn't here, and if they don't, well, that's not my problem. Lovely. That's not how communication works in my company, and I was completely uncomfortable with it. I went to a VP to discuss what we should do. He advised holding off for a day to let everything settle, then going back to Cheryl to coordinate a strategy for redirecting employees who had relied on the admin until a new one could be hired. Since most of our employees worked out in the field, it would be important to communicate with them, but we could wait a day. We also knew that the admin's old email was being forwarded to Cheryl, so at least someone was monitoring for anything critical. Cool, no problem. Except, not even 2 hours later, Cheryl came barreling into the cubicle area of our office, screaming. She was furious, ranting about how our employees were idiots for not immediately realizing that the admin had been terminated. She was sick of receiving our stupid emails and didn't want to deal with our incompetent employees messaging her nonstop. According to her, I was a horrible HR manager who had no control over my people and clearly wasn't capable of handling my job. She screamed at the top of her lungs, insulting me, our employees, and our entire company. Then, to make matters worse, she stormed into the CEO's office and tried to blame me for everything. She had set me up as a scapegoat in case her brilliant HR approach backfired. And the moment it did, she threw me under the bus. From what I gathered, someone had sent the terminated admin a time-sensitive email the night before, but Cheryl hadn't caught it. The deadline passed about 15 minutes before she finally opened the request. Fortunately, I had already spoken to the VP, who saved my ass. Cheryl was reminded, in no uncertain terms, that whatever had happened was her damn fault. She was also told, behind closed doors, that if she ever pulled something like that again, our company would file major complaints with hers. And, considering that our CEOs were close friends, it wouldn't end well for her. But Cheryl didn't stop there. She told every new hire in her company that our company was full of lazy, entitled assholes and actively encouraged hostility between employees. She forbade our employees from entering their section of the office, even though we partially paid for the shared soda fridge that was over there. She held office lunches for her team and then took any leftovers across the hall to other companies, specifically so our employees wouldn't get any. It was the most petty, childish reaction to her failed attempt to slander me. We moved offices within 6 months. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, activate the notification bell, and share a similar story or anything you'd like to say in the comments. See you next time.